Exodus 20. Turn back to Exodus 20. We are plodding along, commandment by commandment, and we arrive this morning at commandment number 6. Commandment number 6. And before I read this commandment to you, one that will be familiar, I'm sure, I want to say that none of us we don't believe murder is okay. No one in here believes murder is okay. But we all believe murder is okay. Does that sound weird? It's supposed to sound weird. No one in here believes murder is justifiable, yet we all believe murder is justifiable. That's supposed to sound strange. And we're going to kind of dig into that this morning. And that will help us, that truth concept will help us appreciate the gospel, who our God is, who Christ is, what he's done for us. That's where we're heading. But for starters, let's read the commandment and we'll say some things about it. Verse 13, really short. You shall not murder. Pretty simple. You shall not murder. And we are thankful that it's against God's law. We're thankful that it's against the law of our land. Aren't we? I mean, of all the crimes you can think of, murder, probably the most disturbing, the most horrifying. It's a really big deal to take someone else's life. Person being here one moment and gone the next because of some surge of rage, or worse, premeditated plan to take someone out. Murder is a big deal. If I were to ask you, hey, God forbid, but you imagine losing a loved one. If you're going to lose a loved one and you could choose whether you lose them to natural causes, some kind of illness, or a tragic accident, or murder, which would you choose? I know you're thinking none of the above, same here. However, if we had to choose, we'd probably choose one or two. We wouldn't choose three. We wouldn't choose murder. On top of all the grief of losing someone, there is the grief of knowing that another person was responsible for that. I mean, that's the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? Not a small deal. It's a really big deal. Horrifying. And in our little group this morning, I can say with confidence that no one in here has ever broken this commandment. At least we don't know about it. If you have. There's no murderers in here. And so if we were to stop there, we could all just pat ourselves on the back and go home and go on our way. But you know we're not going to do that. We're going to dig deeper. Like we do every other week. We're going to dig deeper. We're going to think deeply about this and think about what God reveals about the human condition, about our condition, and how great it is that he sent Christ into this world thousands of years ago. How great it is that he lived for us, that he died for us, that he was raised for us. It's all going to come together. So we'll say right now, we are a room full of murderers, okay? A room full of redeemed, forgiven murderers. And let's see if I can convince you of that. So first of all, when it comes to this commandment, and with especially the ones that are horizontal, like we started last week, honor your father and mother, and then we have this week murder, and we have commandment on stealing and adultery and coveting. When we think of these, there's sort of two applications. One would be the societal level, the sort of horizontal application, and the other one is the spiritual or vertical application. So let's start with the horizontal, the societal level. They needed laws, right? They're a growing community. We've said before, the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness now. They've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to govern. They need the law of the land, and they need to know what's appropriate, what's not. Well, it's not appropriate to murder somebody. And along with that, they assigned the death penalty, the capital punishment for this capital offense of murder back then. God gave this law through Moses for those people. And you can think of, again, if you put yourself in their shoes, you've got this community traveling along in less than ideal circumstances. They've gone without water, without food. They're caravanning along. It's a very difficult situation. God's providing for them, that's true, but human beings, being what human beings are, I mean, you know there are plenty of occasions for conflicts, quarrels of all kinds, and murder. And murder, I assure you, took place in that community just like it does in every other community on earth. Murder takes place. And God says, shall not murder. And the one who murders shall be put to death. In fact, it goes all the way back to Genesis. Before Moses even gave the law to God's people, all the way back in Genesis 9, there's this mention of after the flood, and when the world's beginning to, the people are beginning to grow and multiply. It says, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So even back then, God making it very clear that this is not a small deal. This is a big, big deal. And humans need stiff consequences. And we try to avoid political topics here. That's not our purpose. We're about kingdom things. But in terms of the debate regarding, how severe should punishment be and what's rehabilitation look like, it seems from what the Bible presents to us, it would advocate stiff consequences to curb or to restrain the flesh because of what we're all capable of. And to make people think twice, to appeal to people's sense of self-preservation, God says, look, if you do that, you're going to be put to death. Kind of the eye for an eye kind of law, okay? Necessary. Last week, we talked about honor your father and mother, and we said God had stiff consequences even for that. Well, why? And here's one way to think about it. I heard this expression years ago: the best prevention for the electric chair is the high chair. So what happens in the home, how children are treated, how they're disciplined. That's why the Bible is filled with proverbs and other teaching about disciplining your children. Teach them to restrain the flesh, to have some self-control. And gosh, our culture is in tremendous need when it comes to that. We all are tremendous need when it comes to that. God is very clear about the human condition. And so on this horizontal level, he says, look, this is a big deal. You need stiff consequences. There needs to be some healthy fear. He appeals to that sense of self-preservation to say, if you take someone else's life, your life will be taken. It's a big deal. So that's the horizontal application, okay? So then there's the spiritual or the vertical application of this. We've said all along that the Ten Commandments describe for us what spiritual life looks like, what life in relationship with our Creator looks like. Our Creator himself, think of this, is a life giver. Now you may scratch your head and say, wait a minute, he created this world as death all around us, and we're going to die. So how does that fit? Well, look, in a very real sense, though God is, in a sense, the author of death, that was sort of responsive. Like mankind chose death. Like we set ourselves on the course of death. When Adam and Eve chose to walk away from God, chose to minimize the value of God, personally spurn God and go after their own way, God says that is death. And now, as a consequence of that, I am going to establish this curse by which you will experience death in this world, as a reminder of what it means to walk away from me. But that, in a very real sense, we can blame ourselves for, not our Creator for. He's a life giver. He is not, in the way humans are, he is not a life taker in that sense. By design, he created this world and gave life to plants and animals and humans and delights in life. And sin brings about death. Right? So the Ten Commandments describe for us what life looks like. And one thing that spiritual life in relationship with God looks like is it looks like proper treatment of other people. It looks like not taking from other people, whether that means in some small way or literally taking their lives. That is an expression of death. That's an outworking of spiritual death. And in order to explain that sort of controversial statement I shared earlier regarding how none of you believe murder is okay, but all of you believe murder is okay, we have to dig into what it is that's sort of beneath murder. Where does it come from? How do we understand it? How do we make sense of it? Because Jesus said, look, even if you haven't killed anybody, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, hey, you've heard it said, you shall not commit murder. And I say to you, even if you've harbored anger, if you've called someone a fool, it's the word in Greek from which we get the word moron. I mean, to think of somebody just as a moron, to treat them as that, having that little value, which everybody in this room has done countless times. In your closest relationships, in relationship to people you don't even know on the road who cut you off, right? I mean, Jesus says, look, that is a capital offense from God's perspective, because you're looking at another human being created in his image, and you are in that moment trampling on their worth, and you are acting as judge, jury, and executioner. So Jesus says, look, even to have those thoughts, to have those impulses is murder from God's perspective. See that? You have Moses giving the law on Mount Sinai, and then you have Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, giving the law, elaborating the law. You have the letter of the law, and then you have the spirit of the law coming through Christ. He's making it clear we're all guilty. So let's dig into this some more with this desire thing, because it really boils down to that. So I'm going to have you turn to James 4. There's several places we could look at, but I'm just going to have you turn to James 4 with me. It's just good to see these passages, to be aware of this one. Really helpful, probably the most helpful passage in the whole Bible on the topic of conflict, and even what is beneath murder. James says, what is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Starting in verse 1. He says, is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and do not have, so you commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. He says, you ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend it on your pleasures. He says, look, here's what lies beneath murder. Desire. It's that simple. Desire. And all of you are propelled through life by your desires. And some of them are appropriate, and sometimes they're within reason, but they quickly become excessive. What we call inordinate desires, extreme desires. We must have something. And when we must have something, if another person gets in the way of that, they need to die. And you would all say, okay, but I've never killed anybody. And I'm right with you. I haven't either. But you have in a sense, because relationally, when you cut them off, we say, you know what, the relationship's over. Or when you distance yourself, or you speak harshly to another person, or you attack them in some way verbally, it is all still coming from that same heart attitude, that same place. It's interesting. It all starts with this thing of desires. And there was a reformer who said this. I want you to hear this, okay? It's really captures it. He said this. He said, here's one way to understand human nature. This is what drives people in this world, all of us. What the heart desires, the will chooses. And what the heart desires and the will chooses, the mind justifies. So I said earlier, hey, none of us believe murder is okay, but all of us kind of believe murder is okay. None of us believe murder is justifiable, but all of us kind of believe murder is justifiable. Here's how we understand that. Automatically, by nature, ever since Adam and Eve, when we want something along with that, we have this inner attorney that says, yeah, and that's right for you. That's lawful for you to have that. We have our ways of rationalizing or justifying what we want. It is automatic. The Bible says it here in James 4, because he goes later to verse 11, don't speak against one another. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. There's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and destroy. But who are you who judge your neighbor? I mean, right after talking about lust and desire, he goes into this thing of judgment. Why? Those are not disconnected thoughts. Because you see the same connection all throughout the Bible, really beginning in the garden. Hey, we want what we want, and we justify what we want, and then we attack the other person. either blame shift or whatever, but we're sitting as judge. This is right for me. This is appropriate for me. And if you get in the way of that, then you deserve to die. It's all part of our little God complex. It's all part of our living as autonomous creatures. That's what happens when you get on I-5. That's what happens when we all get on I-5, especially on a Friday afternoon trying to head northbound. This is automatic. That's why the Bible joins these two together constantly, of desire and self-justification. And right along with that is the other person, they got to go. So this is fascinating. This past week, thinking about murder, I'm trying to think, how do I make this real? And there's different ways we could go about that. But one I thought of, just dictators, right? The most notorious, infamous dictators who have murdered countless people. And I looked at this website that sort of listed the top 10. So I'm going to give you the top 3, and probably some of you who like history would know these. Number 1, anyone know who the top, in terms of the death toll, top dictators, lives taken? He's number 2. Next guess? Anybody? I think I heard it. Someone say it. It was Mao. Mao in China. And then Stalin, and then Hitler. Mao estimates between 50 and 80 million people. Stalin, somewhere around 23 million people. Hitler, 17 million people. It's a lot of people. And we could just read that, blow by that. But I mean, every individual person, these are grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, children, leaving gaping holes in the lives of the people they left behind. Whole families, whole communities were wiped out. Millions and millions and millions of people just gone. And I'll tell you right now, if you read about these dictators, every one of them felt fully justified in doing what they did. Because it was, get this now, because I remember reading about them in school as a kid growing up, and I thought, wow, pure evil, these guys. And words like communism, it was just automatic evil. I didn't understand at all the way it was all packaged and marketed as a good thing. As good for people, good for the nation. Oh, it sounds good. And it just justifies pure evil, massacring millions of people. And that shocks all of us. But here's what doesn't shock us. We have the same ability within that fallen part of us to do that very same thing. Because what we want, we go after, and we justify it, and we have good reasons for it. And I hear all the time as I meet with people who have carnage, warfare in their households, and the husband insists, well, I just want this, and that's what's right for our family, and she's in the way of that. I don't know why she doesn't get it. And then she says, well, yeah, but I want what's right for us, and I want what's right for our marriage, and if he would just comply, everything would be fine, and I'm fully justified. I give you chapter and verse on why I should have what I want to have. And it's just desires and justification, and it's deadly. And the dictators did it on a large level, large scale, and we do it small scale. I mean, if you want to get real uncomfortable right now, have a conversation with someone close to you. Just honest. I mean, if you really want to get crazy honest and just pull the mask off and just, talk to your spouse or someone and just say, hey, where do you see my desires that I think are fine actually being hurtful to you or to the family or to someone else? Is there any way you see that? Because look, I'm telling you, you don't even see it. I hear people, I see husbands who treat their wives like garbage, and they present their case, and in their case, they're the victim. Like, are you kidding me? And I'm not saying she's like a wallflower, Miss Innocent, because she's doing the same thing to you. I'll grant you that. And then she'll cry victim too for the nagging and everything else that goes on. But it's like, look, this is the human condition. It's really bad. God speaks truth to us through this commandment. Says you're all guilty, in need of help. You need your Savior badly. It's so good that you have him. Humanly speaking, it is take, justification, hate, death. I must have, I demand, respect. I know people who, if you don't take this person's advice, they take it as personal betrayal and cut you off because they must have that response from you. All in the name of the best, doing the best for you and trying to help you get the best. Is that really about the other person serving them? Must have love, must have appreciation, must have pleasure, I must win. So everybody becomes an opponent in competition with everybody. There's this great scene. Gosh, is the movie, this is going to kill me. It's a Tom Cruise movie about the race car driver. Which one's that? It came after Top Gun. Days of Thunder. He's competing his arch rival. They both end up in the hospital because of some accident on the track. If I remember, this is totally off the cuff. I did not have this in my notes. But they end up in the hospital. Dave, you can vouch for me, right? They end up in the hospital and they end up racing in wheelchairs. It's like they cannot stop competing. You must die. I must win, right? So I'm going to say some things. We're getting close to wrapping this up. I just want to say some things. I just jotted down some truths about the flesh to help us understand what we're dealing with ourselves. And catch this, with our kids. This is what your kids are like. To your grandkids, this is what your grandkids are like. This is what everybody's like, okay? Naturally speaking, apart from God's grace, this is what we got to work with. The flesh, the fallen part of us. The part of us that exists apart from God as its own God. Ever since the garden, the flesh which chooses death. So here's some things. Just catch this, okay? The flesh is dead and deadly. It is murderous. The flesh is out to please itself and prove itself. The flesh is a consumer seeking to live by taking from others. The flesh is a carnivore, devouring others, killing others in order to live. And if you missed all those, at least get this one. For the flesh, there are only two options. Kill or be killed. Kill or die. Here's what the gospel tells us. God came into the world form of a human being, and flesh put him to death. And an expression of actual love, an expression of self-sacrifice, an expression of giving, our God allowed himself to be killed. He died. And for us who are bothered by our condition, bothered by our flesh, there's this invitation to look at the cross, to see God doing that, to see God being the exact opposite of what we are by nature, to see him, instead of killing, to see him dying, to say, that is the God I need. That's the kind of love I need. That's the kind of grace I need. Somewhere deep down within me is a desire to attack, to take from other people. And underneath that is even my disgust with God or my displeasure with God. So in a very real sense, when I'm killing other people, I'm killing God himself. That's why he says earlier, you can't take man and shed their blood. Man who is made in God's image, they're a reflection of me. God says, when you kill them, you're killing me. And humans have done that all throughout history. And when Jesus came into the world, they did that in history in a very obvious way, in actually literally putting Jesus to death, which is why I love the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion, where he insisted upon being the one in the film to nail those nails into Jesus' hands and feet. The way he produced that portion of the movie. He stepped in to do that part, to signify that something in him said, I am responsible for this. Even though I wasn't there thousands of years ago, he just, in that moment, felt his sense of responsibility and put himself in the movie doing that. I mean, for us to really believe we do that to God, naturally, it's even like everything else. I self-justify. Well, I wouldn't do that. God says, look, this is your condition. You would. And I'm telling you right now, all God has to do is tamper with the right stuff in your life, and you'd be amazed what comes out of your heart toward him. He just has to mess with the right thing. Maybe you've lived in such a way, you've been and it hasn't happened. When it happens, you will realize, I hope, what is within. And God says, this is what we're dealing with. And for us to see that and see that as the root of our problem, and to see our need for the cross, and to see there God crucified, God allowing himself to be killed, to show us what real love is, to give grace, not life-taking, but life-giving. And then Jesus says, come and die with me. So bringing it all together. So now how does this, because I want you to be impacted practically. I want for you to bear fruit. I want for you to, in your treatment of other people, I want there to be practical outworking of this. How does it happen? Here's how it happens. When we see that one of the most vital things God is teaching us in our lives as his followers is he's teaching us to die rather than to kill. Remember I said earlier, there's only two options for your flesh. It's either going to kill or it's going to die. He's teaching us to die. Jesus invites us to come die with me. That's why he says, if any man desires to save his life, let him what? Lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. It makes no sense to the flesh. The flesh says, I got to fight, I got to have, I got to take. And Jesus says, look, I'm telling you the opposite. Come and die and find that that's where you live. So that's why I had Mikkel read earlier Galatians 2:20. I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Paul's saying, I'm a crucified man. I'm reckoning myself dead. Later in Galatians, he says, I've been crucified to the world, and the world's been crucified to me. He says, I'm learning to die. In God's mind, I was identified with the death, burial, resurrection with Christ, and now throughout my practical life, I am learning what it means to be identified with his death, burial, and resurrection. I'm learning to die. And it is not natural, and we can't just sort of like root it out and kind of ourselves do surgery on ourselves and take out those. I'm just telling you, this is what God is up to in our lives. And as life goes along, especially the things that go sideways on us or things go in ways we wouldn't choose for ourselves, this is what God is up to. Is he's teaching us what it means to be identified with Christ. He's teaching us to die rather than killing. To believe that we can just receive from God and give to others. We don't have to reject God and take from others. Does that make sense? That's what's deadly. Is when we are operating in our flesh, independently of God, then we have got to take, because that is life to it. We have to have whatever. And then when we have to have whatever to live or to feel secure or to feel significant or to feel a sense of identity or worth, when that has to be, then we got to fight, man. And we will fight however, whether it's the full frontal attack or it's the woe is me and make the other person look bad by being a victim, playing the victim card. Either way, it's like, it's just, I got to have. And Jesus says, look, is that killing you yet? Like, are you done yet with that? If you are, come to me, all you are weary, heavy laden, and I will give you rest. What's rest look like? Rest looks like give up. I mean, Jesus lives in this world. He just gives and gives and gives. And everybody around him just takes and takes and takes from him. Even his own followers, his worst week of his life, they just abandon him. I mean, he'd poured years into those guys, done tons for them. Gone. And he keeps on giving. That's the heart of God. That is foreign, alien. It doesn't get any more weird than that. It's not the way of our world. And he says, there's a Christ to worship the value of God who is like that, and then with him to know I have been identified with his crucifixion and resurrection. And God, it's hard and it seems unnatural and it seems perplexing, but God, whatever, I'm going through this and it doesn't, but you're saying just die. You don't have to kill anymore. Just die. I mean, that's profound, you guys. That's what I need. That's what my kids need. That's what your kids, grandkids need. It's what we all need. It's what kills us. It's just what keeps the perpetual warfare going is that fleshly approach. The gospel is the only antidote for it. And we get to know that, and God invites us to believe it. And then he orchestrates circumstances through which he teaches us more and more and more and more that this is life to you. Let's close in prayer, and then we got a little time, so when I come down, we'll talk about it. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the way it cuts to the core of who we are. And it's hard for me to even believe, God, that our state is this desperate. I think I'm a nice guy, and my kids are sweet kids sometimes. And yet there's also this fleshly part that's monstrous in all of us. Trying to secure life for itself. Thank you, God, that you say that in Christ we've been put to death, and that old part of us is dead, but yet it does its thing still, and so you invite us to reckon ourselves dead, to find life with Christ, in Christ. Jesus is the only hope for our murderous hearts, God. Thank you for this commandment. Thank you for the way in progressive revelation your word reveals that the real spirit of the commandment is not only that we should not physically take another person's life, but that we wouldn't do it relationally or spiritually either. So help us to receive the law, to let it do its work, to expose our need, and then to cling to Christ, who alone has love, and in him to bear the fruit of that. We catch ourselves, God, in our marriages or in our relationships with our kids or neighbors, we'd catch ourselves fighting for life, and we remember Jesus' invitation to take up our cross, to die with him, to reckon ourselves dead, to know that's the only way of freedom. It's the only way of love and joy and peace. It's the only way of laying the arms down. God, for that to happen somehow, some way, your Spirit has to break through that shell of self-justification, which says, well, I have a right to this. That justifies even the worst that we're guilty of. So help us, God, to see truth for what it is. See a little bit as you see, and in the truth to be set free. Thank you again for our time this morning. I hope, God, that in it all that we've talked about, that most of all, Jesus is magnified in people's hearts and minds. That his great love for us, laying his life down, giving, even to the point when it cost him his life, that we would see that and appreciate what you did for us. How much we need it, and our world needs it, and we thank you that you provided.